Hey, Joe here from Home Studio Corner. You can't tell from this angle, but this is the first YouTube video in my new studio. Fair warning, it is nowhere close to set up. I've got the desk and a little bit of treatment, but I want to show you it in its completely destroyed, not put together form, and show you kind of how I'm thinking about setting up a studio in a new place, because every room is different, and I've been in a lot of different rooms. But this one I'm excited about. I think it's going to sound good, and there's a couple of reasons why, and kind of walk you through my thought process of how I'm going to set it up, where I'm going to put things, and how it's going to work for me for the foreseeable future. So let's dive in. This is my first time having the studio over the garage. So kitchen's that way, studio's this way. And I dig it a lot. So brace yourself for the ugliness, because it is we've been in here for a few weeks and it is nowhere close to put together, but it's a pretty big space. It's probably, my last house when I was in the big room was probably about this big, but it was right underneath the living room and where the kids would play. And so when the kids were home, or if Pam was vacuuming or something like that, I literally couldn't work or do anything that required quiet. So this one being over the garage, as long as no one's in the garage or right outside in the kitchen being super loud, it's fairly isolated. The kids are on the other end of the house at nighttime, so I can be fairly loud up here. And I'm digging it. So here's the thought process. As you can see, it's a good amount of square footage on the floor, but because of the sloped ceilings, you lose some space to stand. So for example, I can get almost over to this wall before I bonk my head. This one's a little bit different. Actually, it's so messy. Pam's gonna be mad that I did a video with it so messy. I can only get about right here before I bonk my head on the wall. So there's a good several feet between here and the wall that's kind of unusable. I can put stuff here for storage, which is why these are here. I'll talk about that in a second. But I still, lots of space. You could easily fit a drum kit and have a decent sized tracking session here, and you got a nice view of the cul-de-sac there. So one of the things, when you hear people talk about setting up a room, they talk about generally if it's some sort of a rectangular shape that you want to put your desk along the shorter wall, firing down the length of the room. And I totally get that. And if that was the case, then I would put my desk either here or possibly here against this kind of fake wall facing that way. Well, I didn't want to do here because it would be, for one thing, it'd be hard to hang treatment here because I would have to get a ladder or a scaffold or something, and I would kill myself. Secondly, it would look ugly because I'd want to leave some space behind the desk to get behind there to like hook things up. So the desk would be here, and when you first come up the stairs into the studio, you would see the back of the desk, which is the ugly part that nobody wants to see. So I didn't want that. I also just wanted to be able to come in and have it look kind of nice. So you come in and you go, look, that's nice. Doesn't work if the desk is here for me. So I decided not to put it there. So the other option is here, right? And that makes probably the most sense in the sense that the speakers are firing down the length of the room. But my big problem with that is the window. Unlike some of you weirdos, I tend to like to see outside. And when I'm working, I'd like to have some natural sunlight. And if you've ever put a studio desk in front of a window, it becomes really hard to see the screen because you got all this bright light behind it. So you end up putting up curtains or blinds, and you basically shut yourself in and you don't have any natural light. Is natural light a requirement for making music in a studio? No, of course not. But I wanted to have the natural light. And so I chose to put the desk here. So I chose function over maybe what is considered to be proper. So, and if you remember a couple of houses ago, I had my studio in a place similar with a slanted wall, and I thought the desk setup worked well. Now here's why it works well. I mentioned before, this area over here is completely useless because by the time I get to about right here, I bonk my head. So I don't want to put things over here that I've got to actually get to. So we essentially have several feet of floor space that are unusable. That's perfect because I like to have my speakers away from the wall, the back wall, and especially the bottom corners as much as possible because of the bass buildup that happens. The speakers sound a little more natural if they're out more in a space rather than right up against the wall, or especially right up into a corner. Second thing, I realized I've got these big bass traps that I had built many, many studios ago, and they used to go vertically behind my desk. If you remember back in the U-shaped studio room, these were directly behind my desk in the corner, sitting vertically. Well, I have 0 vertical walls that these will fit on. So I started to think, well, I could hang them on that back wall just as absorption, or I could lay them here in the corners and they could be big old honking bass traps back behind my speakers. Normally bass traps go in vertical, the vertical space on a corner or maybe up at the ceiling. And the main reason for that, as I did a little bit of research, was mainly because this takes up floor space. And floor space is kind of at a premium in most studio setups. You don't want to take up a bunch of space for no reason, but this floor space is completely useless. So they're actually accomplishing quite a lot here. And sound waves don't magically rise like hot air. The sound waves are going to build up in these corners, really in all corners. So we want to just try to put bass traps in some corner so that it's going to capture some of those bass frequencies and keep them from building up in the room. So is that technically the best place to put them? I don't know. I'm not an acoustician, but I put them there and it sounds pretty good. So the big areas when you're thinking about setting up your space, obviously I'm a big fan of bigger rooms. The bigger the room, typically the better it will sound, sort of. But the big places, whenever I set up speakers, I want to make sure I've got absorption to the left and to the right of my speaker positions, because the sound is going to bounce off the sides and come back. And it typically what happens is it just messes up the stereo image. You can't hear the left and right as well. And it just makes it harder to mix. I'm not finished with this at all. I probably need a lot more treatment, but actually putting this here and this there has actually worked really well. And I've done some mixing and I think a little bit of mastering in this position with just those two. Now, the big obvious thing, just looking at it, is you've got all this bare wall space. Now, is that ideal? No, I can hear a little of the reflections coming off, but also remember it's angled. And the sound waves are going to follow basic geometry, right? If the sound is coming out this way, it's going to bounce off of this and it's going to go this way. Or it's going to bounce up and hit the ceiling and then go over here and hit that one and then go down into the floor, which is carpet, which is very absorptive. So in a sense, I've got these angles are working for me. My buddy Rick Knockvey at Presonus said his studio was shaped like this, and just the raw room itself sounded pretty good because these angles are doing a couple of things. First of all, you've heard people talk about how parallel surfaces aren't your friend in the studio because the sound will just bounce back and forth between it and create that kind of flutter echo. It just doesn't sound good and it causes some problems. Well, we have very little parallel surfaces here. The wall there is parallel to there, but we've already got absorption there, so we've covered most of that. That far wall is parallel to the wall behind me, but we've got a window, which actually windows work well for kind of absorbing and transmitting sound. And then we've got this absorption here and a little bit there, so not ideal, but there's not really any fluttering happening here. Floor to ceiling, we've got parallel surfaces, but the floor is covered in carpet, and the ceiling isn't, but the carpet is absorbing a lot, so that handles that problem. So then the only other surfaces we have are these angled surfaces, which that one's facing here, and this one is facing here. So it actually, when I first moved into this room and came up here and there was nothing in here, no studio gear, no boxes, no nothing, it actually sounded pretty good. It didn't sound like it needed a lot of work. So if I were to tell you where, from a treatment standpoint, I would want more treatment, probably put something on this ceiling just to absorb or deflect or diffuse or something the sound even further, because there is going to be an amount of sound that's bouncing off this back wall. The cool thing is, if it goes into this back wall, it's going to go down into these absorption and into the carpet. But there's going to be some of it that's going to bounce off this wall here and come back and hit me in the ears, which is just, that's the nature of the room making me not hear things as clearly as I can. Also, it just looks ugly with that big, just white blank slate there. So either like some shiplap or like reclaimed wood along there, it would look good and probably make the sound a little bit better. We talked about that. That's going to be not anytime soon. because it's not urgent. It's working well. Now you could hang treatment here. I'm just not handy enough. I don't trust myself to hang something with eye bolts and have it not swing down and knock me out and kill me. So I'm gonna avoid that as much as I can. The biggest space is over here. I could use more just treatment along these walls because it's easy to put up and it would just help with a little more with the reflections. But all that said, the room actually doesn't sound too bad. I've had these same pieces of treatment for years now, and I've moved them in lots of different spaces, and each space has worked because a lot of times you just need some absorption in the space, and just the fact that some of the sound is being absorbed and isn't all bouncing around, and you've got carpet on the floors, you can tend to make it work and have a good space. Now, as far as everything else, that's the main thing that I'm concerned about is where are my speakers going to be and how are we going to listen and get somewhat of an accurate sound. Everything from there is just more function. So I like having a desk here so I can turn and work on my laptop and then turn over here and work on the studio computer without having to get up because I'm lazy. And I like to have the keyboard close by so I can just kind of roll over and play the keyboard. Thinking about putting my guitars in that little weird nook right there. So I've got this guitar stand, put the guitars there, maybe have amps along this wall. There are my amps. I don't have any storage in here yet, so I need some sort of storage to put mics and cables and whatever that might go along there, or perhaps along this wall here. And then that's kind of it. And then we'll have just a bunch of open space. Maybe get a couch or something for some extra seating in here. That's a possibility. But for now, I'm in land of boxes, so I don't know exactly. But that's the dream. That's the idea. Things I can't wait to record in here are vocals, because there's a lot of room sound, so I'm probably going to record vocals maybe up against that thing, or that one's on wheels, so I can roll it over here and kind of close myself in and figure out a way that sounds nice and intimate, or I might need more treatment or maybe more gobos for that. Also, recording drums just in the room is going to be great, but also putting a mic down there in that stairwell is going to be super fun to get some cool ambience out of the space. And I think that is it. So I promise I will get this together at some point and we'll do a proper studio tour, show you kind of how I ended up setting things up. There will be many videos documenting this process, I am sure. Be sure to follow me on Instagram. I've started getting active on there again, and you'll see some of this in progress as it goes. But as I get it in more of a reasonable working order, I will post a updated studio tour. I've had so many studio tours because I've moved so many times, but I will show you that once this is pretty. In the meantime, if you have questions, leave them below, and thanks for watching. See ya.